Hello, score fans, which sounds suspiciously like hello, sports fans, but for all of you who follow Score the podcast, we are back in business for this special episode with one of the. Yes, sorry. Good. Am I just rolling? Now good? Okay. Hello, Score fans, which sounds a little bit like I'm saying hello, sports fans, but far more to the point. Hello, Score the podcast fans. We are back with a special episode for all of you summertime moviegoers and movie listeners. I had the great pleasure of speaking with Daniel Pemberton, who just scored the amazing Across the Spider-Verse, which is so worth seeing in a theater. Can I get some props? A little applause for in a theater, because seeing a movie in a theater is really remarkable, I was reminded. And Daniel's music is kind of next gen, as you will hear. It's just, he says it's postmodern in this discussion we have. It's everything. And, of course, Metro Boomin puts in a couple songs that are kind of off the charts, or now, as they would say, on the charts. But I hope you'll stick with us. Enjoy my conversation with Daniel Pemberton, and lots of exciting things coming up behind this one. But for now, sit forward, don't relax, and groove on a new episode of Score the Podcast. And Daniel, I must say, I've spent the last, I would say, 3 or 4 days listening to every interview and thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to ask him the exact same questions so he can default to, well, it's funny. What I took away was, but I thought, no, I'm going to have a real nice conversation with Daniel. Daniel, we haven't spoken we've spoken, but the last podcast we did, I looked it up, June 17th, 2020, which is almost exactly 3 years ago this week. I mean, literally 3 years in a week. And
wow.
I remember very distinctly something that happened during that podcast, which is kind of a signature marker of the time we were in. We paused while you banged a pan outside your window.
For the COVID, for the NHS workers who got completely stitched up by our government. What a surprise.
And I think all London at that moment, it was in sort of, the first spring of COVID, would come out. We heard it. It's on the podcast. I listened. They were all banging on their front stoops.
Yeah. It was kind of quite a powerful moment. But again, it was very disappointingly presentational by our current completely useless government, who has no interest in actually protecting the health service, but rather selling it off to private industry. But hey, that's probably for a different podcast.
It might be this podcast. I mean, having just returned from Cuba, I'm sort of trying to figure out, what is there a system that actually works for people? And that might be a different podcast, but I'm thinking that, let's see, capitalism kind of has some issues. Communism seems to not have had a good weekend over there, and socialism, well, Havana, we can leave that for another podcast. Which brings me to Trial of the Chicago 7, when you actually wrote the music for 7 humans who were desperately trying to change things. And I thought about it this weekend. I thought about it because Aaron Sorkin, your director, I know you did 2 pictures with him. And I
Three.
wondered.
Three. I've done three.
Oh, I didn't. I know Molly's Game and Trial.
And Being the Ricardos.
Oh God, absolutely, Being the Ricardos. It's funny because I saw it and I saw the. It's so interesting. I was really attracted to that one because of my experience with Mambo Kings. Another story, but I wondered if Aaron was particularly musical because he just did Camelot on Broadway.
Yeah, I mean, Aaron's like as a director, he's very good to work with because he's very uh, sort of collaborative and respectful of your input on a film. And so some films, like Chicago 7 was interesting because with Chicago 7, when we did that right from the beginning, he was like, I only want 4 bits of score in this movie. And these are the 4 moments. And it was like the opening, the first riot, the second riot, and the ending. And he'd already worked out as a director that he wanted to try and keep those bits incredibly powerful musically, and the rest of it was going to have no score. And then I think as the movie went on, we worked out we could probably like actually just do some very minimal scoring around the other bits. But I love the fact that, you know, he writes the scripts. The scripts are so solid when you get them that, you know, you do some movies where everything changes all the time. Like I've definitely been on movies where the script at the beginning is almost not worth reading because you know the one at the end is going to be completely different. But with Aaron's, it's like Trial of Chicago 7, with the exception of one scene which they'd run out of time and I think budget to do. It's pretty much exactly everything that was on the page from the very first draft I read. And I think that's because as a director, he spends a long time, as a writer and a director, he can spend a long time really thinking about it. And with that, he had already figured out how to use music. Whereas some other films, like when I did Molly's Game with him, that was my first sort of film with him as a director. And he sort of said to me, I want an orchestral score for this. And I just said to him, I don't think that's the right call. I think you want a kind of contemporary electronic type of score. And so I was like, I'm just going to do that. And if you don't like it, I'll do an orchestral score. But let me do this first. And I think he enjoyed me pushing back a bit with the caveat that if it was rubbish, I'd start again. And it worked out great. And I think now we've done 3 films, we've built quite a good level of trust between each other.
There's so much in what you say. I mean, I could have this conversation for a long time because you've just touched on so many great things about the relationship between a director and a composer and how you build that, and your bravery in some ways saying, thanks for your suggestion, I think it's this, and having a director actually say, okay, try it. And I assume you were right, because
yeah, but it doesn't mean I always am right.
Yeah, that's okay. But you wanted to, you had an instinct. You had an instinct to try something. How many pieces of score ended up in Trial in Chicago 7? You said that he had 4 ideas. Do you think he ended up with 20 cues?
Yeah, it's probably about 20, 25 overall. There's 4 really big cues. And then, of course, there's a song at the end as well, which is a really big part of that film, of turning the song into like a central, like sort of release for the end of the film. But, you have these 4 big moments and some more, like, what I wanted to do with the other moments is make them very understated so you didn't really notice them. And the bits when you did notice the score would be at these 4 key moments: opening, riot 2, ending.
It's fabulous. And it's so interesting that he had those ideas. And you're very kind because I'm allergic to directors telling the composer what to do. I had to sit through so many of those conversations where I wanted to say to the director, and never did, of course, would you let him fucking do his job? He knows what to do. Let him do it. But you can't say that.
I mean, there are moments, like, again, it always depends where it's coming from. Like, I've done films, like, obviously it's not fun to get notes, really, but it's also, sometimes notes are good. And sometimes, if you look at, like, Aaron, he's got a vision of this film that is his vision. He spent 10 years thinking about, or, maybe longer or less. And you've got to respect his or hers or whoever's making the film's approach to how they want to do the film. And sometimes you score a scene, you're like, this is so great. And then they might say, but yeah, we need to look at it from this perspective. And it can be frustrating, but it can be right. And it can make the film better sometimes. And if I think something doesn't make the film better, I will push back hard on it, because for me, it's always about what is going to make the best film at the end of the day. But I'll always listen to directors' notes, because like often they can be quite good. It's when it's
you're
someone
very kind, and
less.
you're absolutely right, and it's also the mark of a great composer that you're open to the collaboration, and it's also the mark of any great relationship where you trust each other. And you remind me, of course, the great Maestro Zimmer would get a note, and I'd sit there and want to strangle whoever had just given it to him to say, "You're kidding. That was an amazing piece of music." And Hans would say, "Tell me what's not working for you." And of course it'd be Ridley or it'd be Nolan, and they'd have a really, right there where the guy jumps out. It feels, sympathetic, and I'm not sure. And you think, wow, that I never thought of that. So, of course, when it's a great director and you respect them, it was the guys that always said, "Listen, I know what I'm doing. I played bass in my high school band. I understand music." Those were troublesome for me. I have to tell you that I know I'm fabulously interested in Spider-Man, as everyone is, in Spider-Verse, but I just want to give a shout out to Slow Horses, which I consumed every episode and just dug the shit out of. I thought it was so cool. That also, in addition to that fabulous song you had for Chicago 7, the Slow Horses song is not to be sneezed at either, and your collaborator. But I just love the series and the work you did. I dug it.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, we're just doing the third series of Slow Horses now.
Can't wait.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's a fun show, and the fact I got to do that song with Mick Jagger is one of the most surreal but cool experiences of my life.
I'm sure you've been asked this 1,000 times. I'm curious. Were you in a room kind of noodling to make a song, or was it just emails and files?
No, it was emails, texts, voice memos, lots of phone calls. And he's really nice. We had lots of phone calls, chats. I've got his number. We text and chat on the phone sometimes, which is very surreal. But he actually came down to one of the Spider-Verse sessions. He was at Abbey Road doing a playback of the Stones' new album. And so he popped in. It was very good timing, because we were doing a brass pickup session. And I was like, I can probably pause this for like 15 minutes and not stress out. So because when I run a session, I run very tight sessions. As a former executive in the studio department, you'll appreciate composers who understand budgets. And so I always really...
that. I'd like to thank you in advance.
Yeah. I always really try and work out how I can get the most out of every session, and, working, like I'm quite good at time management. And so normally every second is like unbelievably vital. But we took a break, and the conductor was like, "Why are we taking a break? We're 40 minutes into this session." And I'm like, "I'll explain to you later. We're taking a break." And then just at the end of the break, we started 5 minutes late, and everyone's sitting around, and I'm like, "Okay, I suppose I better tell you why we're late." And I brought Mick into the section. So everyone, ladies and gentlemen, so Mick Jagger, and
that's so cool.
Did
you go into the cafe downstairs, or did you just chill in the control room, or where?
Oh, no, he just came into the control room. I mean, when we did Spider-Verse, we had a variety. Tom York as well from Radiohead. He came up to hear some mixes, because he was doing some stuff with The Smile. And I sort of did some stuff with Tom on Motherless Brooklyn with Edward Norton. And so it was kind of like, in terms of like, celeb hangouts on a score, Spider-Verse is probably the highest. We've got Mick Jagger and Tom York. There's some quite good people checking out the score.
It also, I'm going to wager that in the future, both of them when thinking of, I have this film project, there was, Daniel sort of feels like a cool vibe, and they're going to call you. Although I wonder if Tom calls Johnny Greenwood, or maybe he never calls him to do something like that. But
Well, Tom scores movies as well. Tom's done Suspiria.
That's right. He did.
Tom and Johnny are ridiculously talented, and when they were doing the Smile album, like, they had a real vibe going on at Abbey Road. They were painting. They had their artist, who Stanley, was painting while they recorded. This was in Abbey 2, in the lounge of Abbey 2. They'd set up a painting studio in there, and they were like just jamming stuff out left, right, and center. And I think the thing that's interesting about them is they are real artists who really care about the music and pushing the boundaries and being great performers. I mean, they are really talented musicians. I am not a really talented musician. And
what's really interesting is that last sentence you just said, you're not, because the Spider-Verse score, both, but particularly the one I just have spent time with, I would put you in the category of a musician who cares deeply about every single, I would even break it down. It's not even eighth note. It's 32nd note, and the shape of it and the placement of it. Listen, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read you a quote of yours, which I thought summed it up. I found this in one of your interviews. You said, it's postmodern film music that comes through a filter of the last 100 years of culture, in the same way at the artwork. If you look at traditional film music, those traditionals are grand classical pieces. I've grown up surrounded by hip-hop, techno, rock, classical, jazz, experimental music, avant-garde music, and those influences are in the score. I love that, and I heard that, and you kind of explained it to me, because listening to the score and watching the film prior to reading that, I kind of had this moment of, what do I call this music? I don't know, because it just went from this kind of crunchy techno to a kind of an 80s pop vibe to, this is kind of a beautiful Gwen, ethereal. I realized it was everything. You were doing exactly what I was watching on screen, which is painting with music. And I'm really impressed, Daniel. I am really impressed. I think you have defined something. I mean, it's just beautiful. And I can tell you that every time I listened to it, and when I saw the film, I was personally exhausted imagining how much work you did on this movie, and how did you find that ability to go that deep? Was it the filmmakers? Because you could have, at about halfway through, said, I think that's good enough.
I mean, trust me, I'd have quite enjoyed saying that. But I think with this film, it is such a unique film. And I know as a composer, you've got to go with the movie. You can't impose a composing style or creative style on a movie where it's going to hurt the movie. And I think because this movie, similar to the music, has all these influences, such a wide kaleidoscope of influences, it meant that I could pull on that, which was really exciting for me. I couldn't pull on that, let's say, for Being the Ricardos with Sorkin. Beautiful movie, but I couldn't approach the music in that way. That was a lot more traditional orchestral approach. But with this, what's exciting for me is I like writing music where you can't define what it is. When you upload things on Spotify, you have to fill in these boxes. Okay, what box does your music fit in? And I love the fact that most of the time I don't know what box to tick, because none of it represents what I'm doing. And I think when you create art, especially music, that cannot be definable in a box, that's very exciting, because as soon as you say film music, which is what would call this, I'd call it modern film music. You say film music, people think of big orchestras, da-da-da-da-da, big theme, brass and some strings. Whereas really, I think the thing I love about film music is it is one of the freest, creative musical art forms that hasn't been commodified in the same way so much other music has. Because, you know, people often say to me, well, do you ever do something for yourself? You know, like I'm this sort of hack who's selling his soul to evil corporations. Some element of truth to that, but not really. But there's a thing where it's like, well, I always try and do myself in all these films. And do you think a band...
I love that.
Do you think there's a band who makes one song? They're going to have to keep making the same type of music because they're not allowed to really express themselves in all these different forms of creativity because they have a brand. And if you go off that, record companies don't know what to do. The audience doesn't know what to do. The streaming services don't know how to present that. And because film music is almost invisible and sort of people don't, not say they don't care about it, but they don't really. And so it gives me loads of creative freedom because there's no other people telling me what to do. Whereas if I was in a band, there'd be a million record company executives and other people telling me I need to make it sound more like...
And the bass player.
Yeah. And so I love for me, this score is really just modern film music. And it's kind of everything I think film music can be today, which is an influx of every musical art form. And it's not just music. There's other art forms inspire me. Painting. I've just been to an amazing exhibition, Anderson Kiefer, and he's this artist who creates amazing work. It's in the middle of it is just a smashed up concrete ruin, and it's so brutal and strong. And I'm just thinking, wow, how could I get that feeling from a piece of music? And I look at it and I'm like, well, this palette is very grey and it's very limited. And that's, if I was scoring it, I would probably do something that was actually no way having the musical color palette of Spider-Verse.
I absolutely love that. I'm going to quote a lot of what you said. I have two thoughts. One is in reverse. You remind me that once I was at Abbey Road with Maestro Elfman, and we decided to cancel an afternoon session and go to a Francis Bacon show together at the Tate. And he said that we've for years said not only was the show unbelievable, it was a kind of a legendary reveal of it, the breadth of Bacon's career. But Elfman said that it changed the way he was going to do the next day's session. And I mean, of course you understand artists and you of all kinds. I mean, we all do, whether it's reading a book.
But Bacon's interesting because, like, I don't know if you've ever seen what Bacon's studio looked like. Okay, if you Google Francis Bacon studio, it is like a shithole. It is crazy. It is like paint. It's like a rubbish dump of paint and palettes and canvases. And what I find interesting about it, I remember looking at ages and going, holy crap, that is so insane. But my studio is not particularly tidy. I this is my desk. You look at my desk. It's a mess, right? My place is a mess. But what I've realized, and what I now realize about Francis Bacon, is he didn't want to tidy up because he just wanted to carry on making his work better and just work on his art. And I have the same thing. Everyone comes around my house and they're like, why didn't you get cleaner? And I'm like, well, I don't want anyone to interrupt me while I'm working. And if I'm tidying up, I could rather spend my time making my tracks a bit better or more interesting. So it just stays as a mess. And so I felt some affinity with Francis Bacon, but my place is not as mental as, I mean, it's not great, but there's no way at Francis Bacon level. But Google it. It's such a crazy image.
I will. And if you're ever in LA, recommendation, if you can, is go see Diane Warren's studio where she writes those amazing songs, because there's a DX7 is the only thing that you can maybe kind of navigate through to get to the magic DX7, which she still has.
Yeah.
But I mean, she's moved a couple times. But that hit making Room, you kind of went, huh? So this is where the magic happens. It was surprising. You remind me though, when you say you don't want someone to come in here to tidy up, you'd rather spend the time. There's a fundamental difference between your approach and that of Lord and Miller or the directors of Spider-Verse, which is they have a team, and they have a team for all the different styles. I mean, it goes everywhere from, if there'd be in Spider-Verse, of course, you saw those single frames would come out of kind of an image, and you think, God, that took time to do that. Somebody had to actually just pop a single frame of an image, and then, boom, we're back to the action. You do all the various facets yourself, you imagine it. And I think it's quite remarkable that in your head are all those different musics. It's easy to say, yeah, it's everything I've learned. I've heard all that music that you just mentioned, techno, classical, jazz, experimental. I'm not sure I would have the ability to reach into a paint box and pull out the one I need authentically and create with it. And I'm kind of amazed that you can so effortlessly, it looks like, fluidly.
It's probably a lifetime of I grew up working in British TV, and one of the first things I did, one of the first jobs I got, I'd done a few documentaries that were very low budget documentaries, and then the director, this guy called Paul Wilmshurst, who gave me my very first job when I was 17. He said, "I'm doing a documentary about Elvis Presley. Can you write some Elvis Presley kind of stuff?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, sure, I can do that." And I was like, I got no idea how to do this. So I was suddenly like, right, I'm going to listen to loads of records and try and pull apart how to make this kind of music. So I did that, and I did it not particularly well, but I did it okay. And then I realized I could just keep doing that. And as a result, I kind of had this foundation through slightly blagging it and pretending I could do things that I couldn't. And then just learning very quickly. I did that all through TV. I tried to learn how to, write stuff for jazz, how to write for strings, how to program crazy electronic stuff. And I kind of used every job as a way to learn something. I still do that in films. Every film I do, I did this film Amsterdam last year, beginning of this year. And with that, I just wanted to write for woodwinds, and I've always wanted to write a score just for woodwinds. And I was like, okay, finally I get a chance to do that. How's that going to work? What can I do within woodwinds that's within that limitation? And that's really interesting. And you find things you're like, wow, contra bassoon actually sounds fucking awesome. And it's got a weight where the bassoon can be a bit kind of comedy. The contra bassoon is really serious.
John Williams uses it for scary shit sometimes.
Yeah, it's good sounds.
It's sort of amazing because you've also articulated what makes a film composer, and you said it earlier that it's not a band who's going to play the same thing. It's somebody who's going to create the sound of a movie with whatever resources, and it's just how wide your palette is and how curious you are. People would come to me always and say, "Can you listen to something? I think it sounds like movie music." And I always wanted to say, I don't know what that means, because I've worked on movies where it was a polka, and I've worked on movies where Sacha Baron Cohen would want the sound of a Kazakhstan banjo player that he'd heard on a record, and can we duplicate that? And it would be orchestral. So movie music is everything to me. And it's funny you mentioned Amsterdam. I actually was with Christian Tapia de Veer. And I think he had spoken to you just as you'd finished Amsterdam, and we had a conversation about something he'd been asked to do, and he said, "It's interesting. I just had a conversation with Daniel Pemberton about doing Amsterdam, and it's affecting the way I'm thinking about my next film." And I thought, that's really great. That's really great.
Well, it might have been like, be careful what kind of, big studio shit shows you get involved with.
I think it's exactly what we talked about, because he'd been offered a big film, then he was now, and I think that's a really hard thing for a composer. It's a hard thing for an actor. You're offered a big film and it looks and sounds great, and how could this possibly go wrong? And welcome to it. It was one of the benefits for me of going from being a musician and to being a studio exec, is that I saw that behind the curtain of, this is all going to be great. I'm so excited to be the composer on something or the songwriter. And then you get into these situations where, really, it's this dysfunctional? Nobody likes each other? How are we going to even get to the dub stage if they're not talking?
Yeah,
you don't know that happens.
I mean, the thing with Cristobal that's interesting is, he is a really, really fantastic composer and talent. And,
correct.
You can look, and it's interesting because I've known him for years, and I've been a big fan and sort of his for a very long time. And what was interesting is watching how after White Lotus, everyone's like, hey, we've discovered this new talent. And like, no, he's been around for ages. He's done great, like Utopia, National Treasure. He's done some amazing scores. Well, every score he does is pretty amazing.
Amazing.
And Girls with a Gift, stuff like this. And it's funny how we still need the success of a project to recognize often the talent of the artist behind it. And I get it, because people can't watch everything, or they don't have common things to talk about. But, I still think there's a thing with the film music, or the film industry, where success is looked at through box office and success of the film. And obviously Spider-Verse is doing great at the moment, so that's great.
It's number one, as we are having this conversation for its third week or fourth week.
Yeah, and that's lovely. But most films I've done aren't number one, and there's loads of great scores out there which are not, doing that much of the box office. And it's sort of interesting how the sort of conversation, especially from a sort of studio level, is always through the lens of success of a project. And I understand from their point of view.
Well, they don't know,
want to take the risks. Yeah, and it's
defensible. What do you call that? Defensible deniability, or plausible deniability.
Yeah. You can't get fired for like putting Microsoft Office on your computer if everyone else has got Microsoft Office. Even if it's a terrible piece of software.
I think Alan Silvestri should do this movie. Nobody's going to fire you if it goes pear-shaped, because it was Alan Silvestri, which it wouldn't.
Yeah.
But the opposite was always true. I'd bring in a composer, fabulous, total talent. I've done other stuff. They're great. They're amazing. And some director or junior studio exec would say, "Oh, I hated that movie." And I have to once again say, yeah, but the guys, that was just a bad movie. It wasn't, the composer was brought in, and the fact that he did That Darn Cat, shouldn't. He's a really good.
Great movie.
That's funny. I'll tell Richard Gibb, because I once was in with a director who looked at his thing and saw that his very first film was That Darn Cat, and he locked on. Not that guy. Who else do you have? I said, "This is his first movie, and he's great."
I turned down a movie early on. I think when you're starting out, it's very hard to turn things down. But there was a movie which I'm not going to give the title of, because it would feel a bit unfair. But the title basically said this movie is not a good movie. It was a terrible, schlocky title, and it's one of those does what it says on the. It's almost like Snakes on the Plane kind of title,
right?
And I was like, it could be fun, but I was really wavering. And my UK agent said to me, "Look, one day Ridley Scott At this point, I'd never had any interactions with Ridley Scott, but he just literally said, as a random name out, what if Ridley Scott sees your IMDb and sees that on it? And I was like, yeah, you're right. And so I didn't do it. And weirdly, I did end up working with Ridley Scott. I mean, who knows if I would have ever done that movie.
The Counselor was a big one. And Danny Boyle. I mean, some really... And to your Cristobal point, after White Lotus, everybody's asking, who is this guy and do you know him? And Cristobal did that thing that he does, which I absolutely adore, which is, basically, if you'll forgive me, fuck off,
Yeah, he's very good at telling people to fuck off. I really admire his skill at that. I'm not as skilled as him.
It is a great skill, and be outside Montreal. And we talked about he has some, he's gonna move further out of Montreal. And, was I interested in this kind of how remote can he go? I loved that. And I would talk to Hollywood types who, do you know him? Yeah. God, he's difficult to reach, isn't he? And I think, yes, he is. And there's a reason why, because of you. I want to ask about a really important piece of music in the history of Western culture, which is called 10 Ragas to a Disco Beat. How did you find, I've seen all the stuff about how that was an important and for that scene, but I just wondered, is that something that I should know? Because if I lived in the UK, everybody knew it, and it's like some obscure American track that everybody says, oh man, I love that. I mean, I'd never heard of it. How'd you know it?
It's pretty obscure. I kind of grew up very much into sort of electronic ambient music, and there's a bunch of records that are quite important. If you look at the sort of history of dance music, there's things like there's a album called E2 E4 by Manuel Gotching, I think. I can't pronounce it. There's things like Terry Riley, Rainbow and Curve there. There's these sort of seminal psychedelic electronic sort of things that pave the way for things later, and you sort of pick them up as you go along. And I remember when I found out about 10 Ragas for Disco Beat, just reading about it and listening to it and being like, this is fucking crazy. This guy had inadvertently, and it's
good sounds.
It's more like someone having the toys that some other people had and just doing something with them, like really interesting. And because that, the sort of world of acid house kind of came out of Detroit, and you think of electronic music out of Germany, and it was just someone doing something similar, but just not being recognized at the time. And I always loved the way it had a bouncy feel, electronic feel that was Indian, but not the Indian we're used to hearing in movies or how we sort of perceive Indian music. And I wanted to play with some of the sort of more, I wanted to play with that side of things. And I wanted to play with some of the tropes of Bollywood scoring, where they have always like big, muscular shouts, which I love. And I love the boldness of Bollywood stuff. Like it's
Jai-ho.
Yeah, it's big. It's just, they go big. Like a couple of my scores have been sort of popular in India, and they've always been ones that are really, really bombastic and bold and sort of crazy. And they dig the craziness out there. And I love that.
It's just a great sequence.
Yeah, that side of things. I would definitely be up for playing more. There's certain worlds where you're like, I could play more on that. That would be fun. Well, one of my favorite instruments in that, which you don't even really hear that much in the score, is an instrument called a dad, I think it is. It's a drum. It's like a tiny drum about this high. It's like a mini, it looks like a darabuka, but really small. And we have this amazing Indian percussionist. And he's just bending it and changing the pitch and made it look so easy. I'm like, I've got to give this a go. And he'd be like, duk, 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 duk. I have a go. It's like, just sounded absolutely right. It's like, this is easy. I should get one of these. I'm like, no, it's really hard. And there's loads of cool little bits in there in the stems, which no one will probably notice. But
those are the kind of sessions that I would stand by, watch it take place, and as you walked in, I'd say, "You saved the movie," because it's the kind of thing that not a lot of people will know. But I'm glad, and I will re-listen. Tell us before we go, you are a rock band. You're going on tour with Spider-Verse.
Well, Spider-Verse is kind of going on tour without me. Like we
Oh,
did.
you're not going to be conducting and taking bows at the end?
I'm not doing 60 dates in America. That's for sure. On
I
a
was going to
bus.
say, how can you? I looked at that tour schedule and I sent it to a lot of
Yeah.
people and thought, wow, well, first of all, you're in LA like November or something. I'm coming to that show. You got to come to LA. You got to come out and
Yeah, I
take
think
your
I'm going to
bows
come.
here.
I think I'm going to come to LA.
Yeah,
we just got to
it's
work
also
it out.
award season, and it will be very, very important for you to be here to start warming up the voters.
Yeah.
But
Well,
who will be?
we built that. Who's doing that? So we've got this amazing female orchestra called the Broadway Sinfonetta, and we did a show in Brooklyn, which was kind of an experiment to see if it worked. And it's very complicated to do Spidey live. I mean, I always thought we couldn't do it because it's got so much stuff in it. But what we've done is like some of it's tracked, some of it's live, and it's like there's live scratching, there's some, and I was like, is this going to work? I really didn't know whether it's going to be a total car crash and really painful, but it was surprisingly, I mean, it was really effective. People went crazy for it, and all the promoters were like, ooh, and so they like from what we built, they've turned into this show, and they're taking it round America, and it's a cool experience because for a lot of people, it might be the first time they see an orchestra. It might be the first time they see someone record scratching. It's probably the first time they've seen a record scratching and an orchestra at the same time. And what I like about it is exposing these different worlds of culture, like hip hop and classical, orchestral writing, to new audiences and allowing them an understanding of like what film music is. Because I think a lot of people, they might be huge Spider-Man fans and things like that, but they might not really understand everything that goes into a score. And it's a really cool show, and just watching.
Will there be
that
visuals?
Film,
Will there be a screen?
So the whole.
Oh, are they playing the movie?
Yeah, so it's a playback of the movie with the live stuff on top.
Oh, I thought it was maybe just. That's ridiculous.
I'm not doing the Hans Zimmer live thing yet. I think I need another 30 years.
I think you need another 30 minutes. You are so ready. I would come to see that. You on stage with, it'd be like different islands. There's the orchestral island, there's the electronic island, there's the scratching DJ island.
Yeah.
Daniel, it's really impressive. I was thinking this morning, I remember when and where we met. It was momentarily, and it's interesting if I could have frozen that moment. It was in Ghent at the World Soundtrack Awards, and you were either getting an award or giving one or sharing one, and so you would probably be able to date it maybe 7 years ago, 5 years ago, something like that. Maybe you were getting the best new composer or something, and it was like, oh, hey, man, I saw whatever was one of your earliest films, and we met, and I should have bought stock in you at that moment because I'd be extremely prescient about what was about to happen, which is...
You might not be that wealthy, because I take, as a stock, I don't chase the big bucks movies, I just chase the things that interest me. I turned down like a huge movie once just to do a documentary about disability because I thought it was more interesting.
Oh, and that documentary, quite remarkable, and The Rescue, also quite remarkable, 2 documentaries. But I think it would have been cultural stock of just, I picked this. But it's also a great joy just to see this work, and just listen to Spider-Verse was okay. We are, I've seen over the last couple years pushing towards what I think you truly kind of expressed the width of. I've seen that. I mean, of course, over the last 20 years, you've seen this kind of, here's electronics, here's orchestra, we're going to use some found sounds. All that's, coming in, and there's Hilder recording doors closing, and Hans.
What was she recording? What did Helder record doors closing on? Because that is a big thing for me, doors. Because
Chernobyl.
I spent a
On,
long time recording doors closing, much to the annoyance of one of my girlfriends once on
that's so
holiday.
funny.
We went on holiday to Greece. We turn up
Was,
to this place, this Airbnb thing. I open the door. I'm like, holy shit, that is the best squeak I've ever heard on the door. And I was like, I've got to record this. And I then spent 30 minutes opening and shutting the door, and she was not happy.
it's good.
I can tell you that.
That's
I,
you are.
I just got.
I think you've just entered
I
the
just got.
pantheon of really great composers just doing
I
that.
just got some great squeaks. And if you can hear this, probably you can hear it. I got some great squeaks in. Can you hear a squeak there?
I can.
So I was in Paris last weekend, and in the Conservatoire Art et Métier Museum, and I got these squeaks. I don't know if you can hear them. This is off my iPhone. But look at that's some high level. That's some high level squeaks. So I've got a lot of time for door.
Those
for door
squeaks
slams.
have a little bit of a record scratch vibe, and so that could
Do you know
be
why?
kind of a why.
Do you know why? Because those squeaks are coming out of a gramophone horn. It's basically those squeaks were part of an exhibit that was so you could hear what this piece of equipment did, but it came on a long, like a long metal tube into a horn, and when you move the metal tube, it created a really mad squeak sound. So I just stood in this museum squeaking this fucking tube metal thing, trying not to attract any security guards because the whole place was like really empty. And I spent like 20 minutes hiding in a corner trying to like move this thing backwards and forwards and hoping that no one came in and made any noise because then it ruins my squeaks.
Just be a different kind of sample. Hilder on Chernobyl went with the great sound engineer Chris Adams, maybe, I can't remember his name, and they went to an abandoned nuclear plant in Lithuania before she wrote any music, and it's quite fabulous. And I've heard the pure sound before it got married to score, which is disguises what was happening because there's like a cello with it, but she would record these gates shutting and in an empty nuclear factory and then use them to build a score about, a nuclear disaster. It was the first time I think that someone had gone, it wasn't like, I have a cool idea, I'm going to bang on the hood of my car and we're going to turn it into a bass drum. That, had been done. This was, I'm going to make the score out of all of this sampled debris. And it's fabulous stuff.
I love that approach. I mean, we did some stuff on Spidey. The whistles you hear were recorded in a graveyard in Peckham in London that has a stone mausoleum. And again, I stuck my head through. And whenever when you're in a certain space and you want to go echo, echo, or you want to make a whistle sound, if you can make a whistle, I always I've got to record the whistles because the reverb in stone is amazing. And because this was like a small mausoleum for like 2 coffins either side, or maybe 3 coffins, 6 in total, you could whistle in it. And the whistle would bounce around the stone because it was so enclosed, but such beautiful stone, and it was curved. But it's a small space because stone spaces are often quite big. You don't get small stone spaces very often that are nice stone. And it just created this crazy whistle sound. So I was like, all right, I'll have that. So I sampled that all up, and that is the basis of the whistles you hear when we enter another universe near the end, which I don't want to talk too much about, not to spoil it, but something weird happs and you hear this very odd whistling sound. And that's from a graveyard in London.
I think the riddle that we can leave our listeners with today is the question, did anyone whistle back in that graveyard? No. Okay. Because that would have been really good to record. Just a little bit of a out of one of the graves. Daniel, I know that I could go on for a long time. We're going to continue this, I'm sure, in person More podcasts, more movies coming up. Can't wait. By the way, you better change your phone number because I'm certain, get the guy who did Spider-Verse. And a lot of idiots are thinking, with all due respect, my movie needs that. No, your movie is nowhere near that, but good luck. And so you're going to get those calls, which I always loved, the directors who would come in and say, I need somebody who can do something like this. And I'd say, but you're like, this is a teen rom-com. That's not contemporary. Yeah, but this should be cool. I'm sorry for alerting you to something you already know. They're all going to want your coolness. Pick wisely, my friend.
Okay, thanks so much.
Daniel, thank you. I'll see you
Okay.
next time. Are you going to be in Ghent at the World Soundtrack Awards this year?
I think I might be. Yeah, I don't know yet. But
Great.
yeah, I think I might
I'm going to
be,
do
so maybe
something
I'll see
there
that.
on the Saturday. I'm going to do a live thing with a video game composer who used to be in
Okay.
Arcade Fire. Kind of interesting combo.
Oh, Owen Pallet.
It's actually
Is it Owen Pallet?
Colin Stetson.
Oh, Con
And I think
Stetson. He's amazing. Like there's a great thing. His score to
good.
Hereditary is fucking brilliant. Like I think he's a fantastic artist as well. I love the score to The Menu. He's really good. I really like his work.
Yeah, The Menu crushed me. We tracked him down. I'm going to do a thing with an audience. And Colin, please come if you can.
Oh yeah, I've seen him live before. Again, he's a great performer,
Oh,
great
good.
musician.
That's great to know because I'm on my learning curve with Colin, but dig the music.
He can
Anyhow,
do some crazy circular breathing.
uh-oh. I think we just figured out how we're going to start the evening.
Yeah.
That'll be fun. That's like Dizzy Gillespie. Dude, take care. Be safe.
Okay.
Looks like you're still in Bermondsey.
Yeah, I'm still there.
So we'll talk soon.
Okay. All right. Can't wait to
I
chat to
really
you.
appreciate
All right, it's great
the time.
talking.
Great talking.
Okay. All right. Thanks so
Actually-
much.
Thank you.